November 25th, 1177. A dying 16-year-old king straps himself to a warhorse, his hands so ravaged by leprosy they're wrapped in silk bandages. Before him stretches an army of 26,000 Muslim warriors. Behind him stand just 500 knights. The mathematics are simple: 52 enemies for every Christian soldier. Military logic says this is suicide. History will call it a miracle. Baldwin IV shouldn't be alive. Diagnosed with leprosy at 9 years old, physicians gave him months to live 3 years ago. Every morning he wakes is a medical impossibility. His hands are so damaged they can barely grip a sword. His face, hidden behind a silver mask, is so disfigured that courtiers flinch when they see him. Yet this boy rules the kingdom of Jerusalem during its darkest hour. Facing him is Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. At 40 years old, he commands an empire stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. His armies have crushed every Christian force they've encountered. His reputation alone causes castles to surrender without resistance. He's united the Muslim world through military genius and genuine religious devotion. He is, simply put, the greatest Islamic commander since the First Crusade. The contrast couldn't be starker. While Baldwin fights his own decaying body, Saladin commands over 100,000 warriors across his territories. The kingdom of Jerusalem can muster perhaps 15,000 men total, scattered across dozens of fortresses. Saladin's current invasion force alone numbers 26,000, nearly double everything the Christians could theoretically field. Inside Jerusalem's throne room, panic reigns. Scouts report that Saladin's massive army is moving north from Ascalon, bypassing fortresses, heading straight for Jerusalem. The city's garrison numbers fewer than 1,000 men, most of them old, young, or wounded. Raymond of Tripoli, the kingdom's most experienced commander, speaks the unthinkable. "My lord, you must flee. The kingdom needs its king alive, not dead in a hopeless stand." Others agree. Even the most aggressive nobles fall silent. The situation is desperate beyond words. Then Baldwin does something that stuns everyone. Despite hands that can barely close, despite a body screaming with agony, he demands to be lifted upright. His voice, when it comes, is clear and unwavering. "Gentlemen, I may die tomorrow or in 10 years, but I will die as I lived, defending this kingdom. God gave me this disease for a purpose. When we achieve victory, no man can claim it was by human strength alone." Victory? Has the disease finally reached his mind? But Odo de Saint-Amand, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, is the first to understand. His warrior monks have taken vows to die rather than retreat. If a dying boy can face annihilation with faith, how can they do less? One by one, the knights kneel, not in submission, but in belief. What follows defies every principle of military logic. Instead of preparing Jerusalem's defenses, Baldwin orders an immediate march towards Saladin's army. They'll leave within an hour, taking every man who can hold a weapon. 45 miles through hostile territory to attack an enemy that outnumbers them 50 to 1. The march should kill half the force before they see the enemy. 45 miles in 36 hours. Men in full armor, already exhausted from weeks of constant alerts, horses pushed beyond endurance. The November heat, unseasonably brutal, turns the road into a furnace. Nights begin collapsing after 10 hours. By hour 20, men are hallucinating from dehydration. The Templars take turns carrying Baldwin's litter when he loses consciousness from pain, which happens every few miles. Blood seeps through his bandages from wounds that refuse to heal. Near the village of Ibelin, witnesses see the king's body convulsing so violently that 4 knights have to hold him down. Yet when he regains consciousness, his first words are always the same: "Continue the march." Meanwhile, Saladin makes the fatal decision that will cost him everything. Completely confident in his overwhelming superiority, he allows his army to scatter across 3 miles of countryside. Foraging parties roam freely. Discipline relaxes. His scouts have reported Jerusalem's walls barely manned. Why maintain battle formation when marching to an execution? His commanders are already dividing up conquered lands among themselves. The Sultan has brought his entire treasury, planning not a battle, but an occupation. By dawn on November 25th, Baldwin's force has covered ground that maps say couldn't be crossed in that time. Scouts bring electrifying news. Saladin's army isn't formed for battle. They're scattered, relaxed, unprepared. 6 o'clock brings the first revelation. The Turcopole scouts, who know this land intimately, return with intelligence that make even exhausted knights stand straighter. Saladin's host is spread across 3 miles of rolling countryside. Supply wagons sit unguarded. Horse lines are dispersed. The Muslim army looks less like a military force and more like a migration. But then comes the devastating number. Not 20,000 as feared, 26,000. Their banners darken the horizon. Some knights openly weep. 52 to 1. The mathematics have become even more impossible. At 11, Saladin receives his first warning. Dust clouds to the north, moving fast. His initial reaction is complete disbelief. Baldwin wouldn't dare leave Jerusalem's protection. It has to be a scouting party, perhaps raiders hoping to harass supply lines. He sends orders for a few squadrons to investigate, nothing more. This overconfidence will haunt him forever. By noon, the terrible truth becomes undeniable. Crusader banners appear on the ridgeline, not scout pennants, but the great war standards, the blood-red cross of the Templars, the golden crosses of Jerusalem, and the personal banner of Baldwin IV himself. Saladin's scattered forces frantically try to reform their lines, but 3 miles is an eternity when your enemy is already formed and ready to battle. Commands in Arabic, Turkish, and Kurdish crash into each other as officers try to organize chaos. Here's where Baldwin demonstrates his genius. Military logic demands he wait. Let Saladin organize, then retreat to defensible ground. Use terrain. Every manual of war, every precedent of battle says the same thing. Never charge a superior force on open ground. Never attack when outnumbered. Never gamble everything on a single moment. Baldwin is about to violate every one of these rules. Despite agony that would kill most men, the Leper King demands to be lifted from his litter and placed on his warhorse. Knights rush to strap him to the saddle, his legs useless, his hands barely able to grip the reins. Blood seeps through his bandages where the straps cut into diseased flesh. Yet when he speaks, his voice carries across the entire Christian line. Gentlemen, David faced Goliath with faith. We face 26,000 with God. Then Baldwin notices something Saladin has missed. The seemingly flat plains are cut by a series of ravines, invisible from a distance but deadly for fleeing cavalry. What looks like open ground is actually terrain that will funnel retreating men into natural killing grounds. The young king has recognized what Saladin's experience overlooked. Those ravines will become channels of death. 2 in the afternoon. Baldwin raises his bandaged hand. 500 lances drop to charging position. The Templar wedge, 80 knights formed into a human spear, smashes into the half-formed Muslim center at full gallop. The sound is like mountains colliding, a crash that men 5 miles away claim they heard. In those first seconds, 300 Mamluks simply cease to exist, crushed under iron-shod hooves or transfixed by 12-foot ashwood lances that punch through mail and flesh like parchment. But the real shock isn't the impact, it's what follows. Instead of wheeling away after the charge, standard cavalry doctrine, the Templars do the unthinkable. They keep going, driving deeper into Muslim ranks like a blade seeking a heart. Behind them, Baldwin's 420 secular knights strike in a second wave, exploiting the gap torn by the warrior monks. The charge covers 300 yards in under a minute, 500 ironclad horsemen moving like an avalanche. Their battle cry of Deus Vult drowns out Muslim commanders' desperate orders. At 200 yards, the full terror becomes clear to the Muslim front ranks. These aren't just knights, they're fanatics, men who believe death in battle guarantees paradise. The Templars, especially with their black and white banner streaming overhead, come on like demons. 2:15 brings the first impossible moment. Saladin's center, 8,000 of Islam's finest cavalry, begins to buckle. Not retreat, buckle, like a dam cracking under pressure. The Muslim commanders can't believe their eyes. How can 500 exhausted knights be pushing back 16 times their number? The physics don't work. The mathematics are impossible. Yet it's happening. Then something occurs that defies all military logic. The Crusader horses, exhausted from their forced march, should be failing. Instead, they fight like creatures possessed. War horses bite and kick, adding to the carnage. One Templar mount, its rider dead, continues charging through Muslim ranks, trampling warriors, spreading panic by its very existence. The beast finally collapses after taking 17 arrows, but not before its rampage breaks an entire squadron. 230 sees panic begin its deadly work. A Muslim regiment on Saladin's left wing, seeing the center collapse, begins edging backwards. In battle, hesitation is contagious. Within minutes, the backward drift becomes a stream. Commands become screams. Formation dissolves into chaos. The impossible is happening. 26,000 warriors are being routed by a force they outnumber 52-1. But then comes Baldwin's masterstroke. His 3,000 infantry, hidden in dead ground during the cavalry charge, suddenly appear on the Muslim flank. The psychological impact is devastating. To Saladin's already rattled forces, it seems Crusader armies are materializing from nowhere. Shouts of "We're surrounded" spread through Muslim ranks. Military nonsense, but panic doesn't calculate odds. Baldwin himself, strapped to his saddle, bleeding from stress-reopened wounds, raises his sword. The gesture is impossible. His diseased hand shouldn't be able to grip the weapon. Yet every chronicle, Christian and Muslim alike, records it. The Leper King is leading from the front. 2:45 marks the moment when battle becomes massacre. As Muslim forces try to flee, they discover Baldwin's tactical genius. Those ravines that looked like escape routes become death traps. Knights pursue fleeing Muslims straight into these natural killing grounds. But then at 3 o'clock, something happens that even Muslim chroniclers call divine punishment. Saladin's personal guard, 2,000 Mamluks who've sworn to die before abandoning their sultan, breaks. These are men who faced Mongol cavalry without flinching, who wear their scars like holy relics. Yet faced with Templars who fight like men seeing paradise, they run. The sight shatters what remains of Muslim morale. If the elite guard flees, what hope do common soldiers have? Saladin himself, watching his invincible army disintegrate, makes a decision that will haunt him forever. Abandoning his warhorse, too slow for escape, he mounts a racing camel. The sight of their sultan fleeing on a pack animal destroys the last Muslim resistance. His golden armor glints in the afternoon sun as he disappears into the dusk, leaving behind an army that has ceased to exist as a fighting force. 330 sees pursuit become annihilation. Crusader knights, their blood up, chase fleeing Muslims for miles. The killing is mechanical, efficient, horrible. Lances broken, they use swords. Swords blunted, they use maces. Some Templars, their weapons lost, beat enemies to death with their helmets. The very ground becomes slippery with blood. Those ravines Baldwin identified become charnel houses. Muslims fall in layers, the dead cushioning the dying suffocating under more dead. Some ravines literally fill with bodies, creating bridges of flesh others try to cross. Modern historians still can't explain this part. How did 500 exhausted knights maintain pursuit for 2 hours? How did horses near death from marching find strength to run down fresh Muslim cavalry? The Christian chroniclers had an answer. God's strength flowed through them. The Muslim chroniclers, horrified, agreed this was divine punishment. 4 o'clock brings scenes that haunt the records. The pursuit only ends when Crusader horses finally collapse, their mighty hearts giving out after achieving the impossible. Baldwin himself has fought despite agony that defies description. Knights later swear they see tears of blood seeping from beneath his silver mask, his diseased body literally weeping from the effort. Yet his voice never wavers, calling encouragement, directing the slaughter with tactical brilliance. By 4:30, Muslim dead carpet the field for 3 miles. Bodies clog the ravines 20 feet deep. Abandoned weapons litter the ground like iron seeds. The streaming banners of Islam's greatest army lie trampled in mud made from dust and blood. The numbers stagger even now. Of 26,000 warriors who woke that morning, fewer than 2,000 see sunset. 20,000 Muslim dead. The Crusaders lose 1,100 men. Heavy losses from just 3,500 engaged, but nothing compared to the Islamic catastrophe. The immediate material gains defy calculation. Saladin's army had carried wealth to sustain a long campaign. Gold, weapons, horses, supplies for 26,000 men. In 3 hours, it all becomes Crusader property. The Templars alone capture enough military equipment to outfit every Christian fortress in the Levant. More importantly, they capture Saladin's war chest, literal tons of gold meant to pay his army. In one afternoon, the bankrupt Kingdom of Jerusalem becomes solvent. Baldwin, finally allowing himself to be lifted from his horse, collapses immediately. Knights rush to support their dying king, but he waves them away, insisting on one final act. There on that field of death, the leper king leads his exhausted army in prayer. Non nobis Domine, non nobis, sed nomini tuo da gloriam. Not to us, Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory. The sight of 500 blood-soaked killers kneeling in prayer while surrounded by 20,000 corpses strikes even hardened warriors as surreal. Saladin's humiliation is complete. The man who'd never known defeat arrives in Cairo with fewer than 2,000 survivors. His racing camel saved his life, but destroyed his reputation. Warriors who flee on pack animals don't inspire loyalty. The legacy. The strategic implications are staggering. Saladin's power base in Egypt nearly collapses from the defeat. Syria questions their allegiance. The careful alliance he'd built over decades cracks in a single afternoon. Military historians calculate it takes Saladin 10 years to rebuild a force comparable to what Baldwin destroyed in 3 hours. The Crusader states, granted this miraculous reprieve, gain time they'd never dared hope for. Time to fortify, time to negotiate, time to summon help from Europe. The Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir, usually sympathetic to Islamic causes, can't hide the scope of the disaster. He calls it the most terrible catastrophe to befall Islam in this age. Another writes simply, God turned his face from us that day. The psychological impact on the Muslim world is devastating. If 26,000 can't defeat 500 Christians, What does that say about divine favor? Mosques from Cairo to Damascus fill with believers seeking answers. Jerusalem erupts in celebration when news arrives. Church bells ring for 3 days straight. But in the royal chamber, Baldwin IV lies dying. The battle's physical toll on his ravaged body is catastrophic. Physicians warn he might not survive the night. Yet somehow, impossibly, the Leper King endures. When asked how he'd found strength to fight, Baldwin whispered, "Pain means nothing when God requires service." For 10 years after that bloody November day, Saladin approaches the Crusader states with newfound caution. The man who'd swept all before him has learned that numbers alone don't guarantee victory, not when facing an enemy willing to die for their cause. The economic windfall from captured treasures funds Crusader defenses for a decade. New castles rise, old ones are reinforced. The military orders recruit aggressively, their ranks swelling with men inspired by Montgisard's impossible victory. Baldwin IV continues his impossible reign for 8 more years, each one a medical miracle. The boy who shouldn't have lived past childhood commands respect from enemies who outnumber him 50 to 1. Even as his body literally falls apart, by the end he's blind and can't walk, his mind remains sharp, his courage unbroken. When he finally dies in 1185 at age 24, Saladin himself reportedly said, "I feared that man more than any army." The tragic irony strikes hard. Just 2 years after Baldwin's death, Saladin reconquers Jerusalem. Without the Leper King's inspired leadership, the Crusader states crumble. The kingdom Baldwin saved with 500 knights can't survive without him. At the Battle of Hattin in 1187, Saladin destroys the Crusader army using lessons learned from Montgisard. Never underestimate desperate men. Never assume victory before battle is joined. Never let confidence become carelessness. Modern militaries still study Montgisard as the ultimate example of psychological warfare. Baldwin understood something Saladin missed. In battle, morale matters more than mathematics. 500 men who believe God fights beside them are worth more than 26,000 who doubt. The Leper King's true genius wasn't tactical. It was making his knights believe the impossible was inevitable. The battle's legacy echoes through centuries. When any hopeless stand succeeds against overwhelming odds, we see Montgisard's shadow. It remains proof that sometimes, just sometimes, courage counts more than counting. Both Christian and Muslim sources agree something supernatural occurred that day. How else to explain 500 defeating 26,000? How else to understand exhausted horses outrunning fresh ones? How else to comprehend a dying teenager outgeneraling history's greatest Muslim commander? In the end, Montgisard stands as history's most glorious last stand. A moment when the impossible became reality. When 500 stood against 26,000 and won. When a Leper King's bandaged hands held back the tide of history itself, even if only for a moment.